Hello and welcome to Brain Trust Live's 2024 California Prop Guide Spectacular.
Hey y'all, I'm Brent.
I'm Lila, and you can find us on the web at www.braintrustlive.com.
Here we are.
We come to you with a special episode.
Yes.
If you're tuning in to get election news that is not related to your ballot that you just received in the mail, we're going to cover a lot of that next week. The election's getting close. If you're getting nervous, go make calls or knock doors or something. This is the time to do that stuff.
Sure.
But we're going to talk about moves in the field a little bit more next week.
Yeah. But the other thing that you might be nervous about is the ballot that you did get in the mail.
And it's 1,000 pages long.
Right. And you may have opened it and you may have looked at it and you may have thought to yourself, I'm just going to throw this in the garbage because I'd rather do that than actually fill it out.
That's right.
We're going to help with that.
That's right. We are going to have our fuller ballot guide posted online, but today what we're going to do is take you through the state props.
Yes.
And I think if you're from out of state, it's still an interesting listen because if you are from out of state, you might not realize, you might have heard us talk about this, but you might not realize a lot of the weird and duplicitous ways that the California props are used on the ballot.
Yeah.
And this is pretty common in a lot of Western states. It's something I think worth thinking about. If you're somebody who's in favor of more expanded ballot initiative processes, there are people who advocate to put more stuff into ballot initiatives because it's a way for
democracy.
It's a way to get people to vote, especially on things that are central to their rights in a direct way, and that's great. There are also bad ways to use the props, and we have all of those things.
We have prime examples of those
of every kind of prop use on this ballot. So I think it will still be an interesting listen if you're from out of state. But if you're from California, it will be an informative listen because there's too damn many of these. And how are you supposed to keep track of all of them?
Yeah.
So let's start.
Let's
get
into
start
it.
with Prop 2.
That's it. That's the first one.
That's the first one. This authorizes bonds for public school and community college facilities. It's a legislative statute, and it would basically authorize $10 billion in bonds to make capital improvements in schools and, community colleges and state-run technical programs, that sort of thing.
And if you're wondering why our legislature just doesn't allocate that money, that's because they don't. That's not what they do.
We were also wondering that, and the answer is that we have to do it.
Right. And I think a lot of people don't know that because I think that there are going to probably be questions come up from people that I specifically know asking why they have to vote on this, because we do get a lot of school bonds going on here, both local and state. And people are used to getting them locally, right? Because that's when sort of a local school district will need more money and you have to allocate the funds, and usually it's a raise to your property tax of some sort. But statewide, it's a little weird, and I think people are going to be like, wait a minute, didn't I just vote on this? And yes, you did, and you probably voted no because it didn't pass in 2020.
You guys...
So our schools are just now 4 more years dilapidated than they were in 2020. And guess what, friends? The reason that we had this bond in 2020 was because they were dilapidated at that time.
That's right. And listen, is this a perfect yes-no choice to make? No, because why are we voting on this? Why can't the state legislature do it? Why do we have to do it in bond form so that we then have to pay interest on it later? That's dumb. And also, is the system that this bond sets into place a perfect way to get resources to the schools that need them the most? No, it's not.
No.
And it's not going to be.
No, there's a whole weird system for how this is allocated. I think, obviously, local municipalities still have to pass local bond measures because they have to, I think, be able to prove that they're going to be able to fund a certain amount of the money that comes from the state. And it has to be, there's the way that these schools get funded is so insane. It's a miracle that they're still open.
Public education
some of
in the state.
them barely are.
Yeah.
Which is why you should be voting yes.
Exactly. Yeah. It's this is one of those props that, if it privileges wealthy communities who can afford to hire advocates to go after this money. There are a lot of reasons why it's not a perfect system. Yeah. Also, though, the schools in California broadly need this money.
Right.
There are a lot of them that need money to make capital improvements. We need people to be learning in safe environments, and we don't currently have that. I think there's some discussion also about whether this money can be used for to create better air safety in the schools as as sort of a continuing conversation we're having about COVID safety in schools. But more broadly, when a school bond measure comes onto your ballot, it's because California's dumb, and you should usually vote yes on those unless there is some big issue with the way the funds are being allocated that would actually make it more dangerous to pass than not. That's almost never the case because more money for schools is always better. The danger here is that, the schools that need this money the most never get it, but that's a danger always. So,
always. Right.
It's a yes vote. And you just have to be sad that you don't get a chance to make a better yes vote.
It's one of those things where it's like if you're a person who likes to go around in public and out in the streets and talk about how we need strong public schools, and then you're thinking about not voting for this because of some
technical reason about the way the funds are allocated. Yeah.
Then I'm going to need you to find a mirror.
That's right.
It's yes.
You're voting yes on this. Let's talk about Prop 3.
Let's move on.
Prop 3 only needs to exist because our federal our federal government has fallen into a catastrophic situation.
SCOTUS specifically by way of Donald Trump.
That's right. This is a prop that only exists because Donald Trump and his SCOTUS exist.
Right.
And that is so you remember 2008. You're a person.
Sure.
And you remember that in 2008, that's when we voted yes on Prop 8 to define marriage between a man and a woman in the state of California, where everyone's gay. And that has been a thorn in our side ever since. But fortunately, because of the federal government, it became sort of irrelevant at a certain point.
Right.
So we never really had to deal with it. We were just like, okay, well, the law in California says marriage is between a man and a woman, but the federal law says it's not. So we don't have to worry about the state law.
Right.
That supersedes the state law.
Yeah.
But now we have to worry about the federal government changing their minds because the federal government's being dumb.
That's
and they already changed their minds about abortion.
That's right.
And they could change their minds about any of the rights that we currently enjoy at any time because of silliness.
That's really what spurred this because I can't remember if it was Justice Thomas or someone, but after one of the conservative justices sort of in their writing on the overturning of Roe basically hinted at going back and looking at Obergefell versus Hodges, which was the case that came before them that allowed federal same-sex marriage. So some legislatures, and this was introduced itself by the legislature. I think it was Scott Wiener and somebody else. I can't remember, but
I also can't remember who else.
But and so they were just sort of like, we need to get rid of that Prop 8 language because if the federal government somehow overthrows or if SCOTUS overturns Obergefell, then all of a sudden we have this law that's still on our books that says marriage is between a man and a woman.
So this would basically codify a constitutional right to same-sex marriage.
Right. It gets rid of the Prop 8 language, essentially.
Yes, exactly. And it's, that's an easy yes.
It's an easy yes.
You don't have to overthink that one.
Right. But that's why I did, this is another one where it's just sort of like, I think a lot of people are going to be like, wait, huh? It's like, I voted on Prop 8. We have this nationwide. Like, what's this doing on my ballot? And that's why. Yeah.
It's to protect you from the nonsense federal government that's going on right now.
That's right.
Now, if you want to just think of it within that context, that's fine. But there's a second story with this prop that does not affect your vote on it. You're voting yes on it. Don't worry about these details. There's a weird thing going on, though, where Kevin DeLeon, our fallen city council member who was involved in the racist city council scandal that took down Nuri Martinez and what's his face?
Yeah, a bunch of people who resigned.
A bunch of people who resigned, and Kevin DeLeon who did not.
Right. Still sitting on the city council, running for re-election right now.
That's right. This is a man who had plans to run for statewide office and probably still does. He had a big war chest. And so he was trying to figure out how to kind of resuscitate his image in the eyes of Angelenos who think he's a racist asshole. And he has chosen to do this by affixing himself to the Yes on 3 movement. And so there is all this advertising around Yes on 3 that features his face. And first of all, don't let that stop you from voting yes on 3. Try to ignore it.
Just because you hate Kevin DeLeon, and you do.
And you do. But he's not some great champion of LGBT rights. Don't think that that's what's going on here. No. He never has been. He never will be. He has come up with this as a genius strategy to make you forget that you hate him for being a racist asshole.
Right.
But also, don't let him resuscitate his image over this.
No.
So both vote yes on 3. Do that. Right. Don't even think too hard about it.
And if you live in his district, do not vote for him.
Do not vote for him. If he decides to run for statewide office, do not support that bid. He has a lot of money because he's been fundraising for his whole life.
Right.
And he's using it for yes on 3, which is like, I guess, go for it. But don't let that be the thing that rehabs his reputation.
Yeah.
Ignore that. And just be happy that there's yes on 3 advertising out there.
Right, exactly.
I don't know what to say.
We got another bond measure.
Another bond measure. This one is a sneaky one also, because this is money that we shouldn't have had to vote on. There was a state government approved $54 billion that was going to go to fund climate change related action. There was like some climate fund we were working on.
Yep.
And Gavin Newsom has been on sort of like a lifelong mission to not raise any taxes on rich people. He doesn't want to be tagged with that because he's been trying to run for president for the last billion years.
Yeah.
And so in an effort to avoid raising taxes when there was a budget shortfall, to make sure that this $54 billion could be funded, he worked some deal with the legislature where instead of just putting $54 billion into this, they were going to put $44 billion into this and then go to the voters for the $10 billion. Now that's dumb because then, like I've said before about bond measures, then we got to pay interest on that. It's actually more expensive for everyone, and it's a silly way to get around the inevitable fact that at some point rich people should be paying their fair share.
Yes.
Especially to state government. You know that we no longer play by the taxes for federal government rules anymore because we're MMT people. But state government is different. They can't issue their own currency.
Right,
so
exactly.
we play by different rules there. Anyway, so this prop authorizes $10 billion in bonds to spend on environmental and climate projects. You should vote yes on it because we want to spend money on environmental and climate projects.
Yeah.
A lot of this would go to drinking water improvements. And this bond does do a good job of like prioritizing lower income communities and making sure the money goes to the people that need it the most.
I think there's some, there's some methods for, exactly. Right, yeah.
There's annual audits, and that's an easy yes, but what should be a no to you in the back of your mind is the idea of the state government constantly coming to voters for this kind of money when they could just allocate it themselves.
Right.
Like, I just don't want to be involved in these kinds of decisions.
What are they doing if not the budget?
But, like, what are we paying them for? We're paying them to put props on our ballot so that then we have to do the work of researching them? Like, I don't want to be involved in that at all.
No.
This is the kind of thing where I'm like, okay, I elected people who want to do something about climate change. Good for me. I've done my job. I did as much research as I should have to do as a regular citizen who has to go to work every day and do other stuff.
Yeah.
To not have this be on my plate anymore.
Yeah.
And now I need to figure out if this bond appropriately prioritizes the right communities and whether or not it has the right auditing structure. Like, don't ask me for that information.
Yeah.
But like, vote yes on it because we want to do this funding. But think to yourself next time while you're voting for someone, how can I force them to do their job? Right. Is there someone in state government that I could vote for who might be willing to do the job of being a state government?
Right. This is going to come up as we continue to go through these props.
It's just going to keep coming up.
We're not done requesting the state legislature to do what we supposely elected them to
the
do.
work of a state legislature.
Yeah, exactly.
Prop 5 is weird.
It's another yes.
Yeah.
You're going to vote yes on Prop 5, but it is bonkers because California's constitution is weird because why wouldn't it be?
Right, of course.
And one of the things that is weird about it is that it requires most local governments for when they passed bond measures.
Which is how we get all of our funding for everything, by the way.
As we've already told you about two of them.
At every level does nothing. So
Right, exactly. Yeah, we've got multiple local bond measures, both in the county and the city of West Hollywood. We're not going to get into those today, but our ballot is bond measures city out here.
It's the longest prop ballot that you could possibly imagine using your wildest imagination.
Right.
So like,
and part of the reason why we have to do this is because of the funding that we've been talking about and how it gets allocated. But another reason is that oftentimes they just don't pass because in our Constitution, most of them require a 2/3 supermajority. They have to pass with 66%.
So weirdly, at the state level, they don't. But at the city and county level, where you most urgently need the funding, they do.
So Proposition 5 wants to change California's Constitution and bring it down from 66% to 55%. And
why'd they pick 55?
I was going to say, your follow-up question might be exactly that. And the answer is...
Because.
Because.
That's why. Just because of the reasons.
Because arbitrariness.
Yeah. Why not? 55.
So,
perfect.
So vote yes, because yes, it's going to make it easier for local governments to issue bonds and then pay for infrastructure. Right. But also what?
Yeah. And also, how could this be a choice that's going to vote? This is the perfect example of a choice that I guess if it was the only prop on your ballot, you could have a meaningful discussion about it. But hidden in all these props, it's no one has time to parse this. It's a decision that should belong to voters in a lot of ways. However, it's a decision no voter could possibly understand the consequences of. Sure. You know, it's like, it's not right that the state legislature necessarily make this decision for us. I get that. I get why this prop is on the ballot.
Yeah,
whereas some of these others,
technically a constitutional amendment, so I think it has to go to
exactly.
voters.
And like, that's great. If you are voting on 45 other props, though, you don't have time. No one knows what this means.
Yeah,
There's no way for voters to have any sort of substantive conversation or education about what this means. And because of the way our prop system works, what they're going to get is a discussion from the best moneyed side of this conversation about why it doesn't work.
Right,
because
exactly.
Guess who's against this prop? Anyone who wouldn't want taxes to be raised ever. And that is real estate people.
Real estate people, right,
The California Association of Realtors is spending millions of dollars in ads opposing this because they don't want local bond measures to raise local property taxes.
That's right.
They are one of the biggest villains in the California prop system.
Yeah.
They frequently prevent us from passing progressive housing policy, and we are a state with a massive housing crisis, as you may know if you live here, but you probably know if you don't live here, too.
More on that later also.
More on that coming. But there are like a few organizations that are like sort of prime villains in the prop system.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And the California Association of Realtors comes up every year. They spend $1 bazillion on opposing props that would be good for people.
That's right.
That's sort of their main vibe.
Yeah.
So you're probably going to see a lot more no advertising for Prop 5 than yes.
Yeah. I haven't seen a lot of it, but you're right. That's what the money is going to be with no, because they're going to be threatening that your property taxes are going to go up. And this specific proposition does not raise your property taxes.
Correct. It has... you would still be in charge of raising your own property taxes because all this does is make it so that your community makes this decision in a more equitable way.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So that, and think also, I mean, a 2/3 majority being required when all of the funding is always going to be with the minority, because of course this is not a homeowner heavy state or city county.
Yeah.
That is also problematic. So, you know, you have to think about where the funding structure for these props comes from as well, and how that sort of like tilts things in one direction or another. And I would say in the case of local bond measures, the minority always is better moneyed because raising taxes is an issue that rich people care about.
Yes.
And so you also have to think about whether you want your community to be able to invest in itself or whether you want rich people to only be able to invest in themselves.
Right.
And that is really what this prop allows
for sure.
But what it does not do is raise your taxes. And also there's no real yes on 5 constituency aside from the people. So you're not going to see a lot of yes on 5 advertising. But vote yes on it.
Yes.
Be smart, you know.
Yeah.
Prop 6 is an important one.
Very important.
And that's a real one that I'm glad the voters are getting a chance to weigh in on, just because it's so it would overturn like a really heinous situation we have going on in the state.
Yeah.
But it's also the kind of thing where you're like, maybe we could have stopped doing this.
It's crazy. California is like one of only, 16 states, is that what it is, that still has involuntary servitude for incarcerated people?
Yeah.
So, like, we're going to get rid of that.
Yes.
Which is why you're voting yes on this.
Yeah, you're voting yes to vote no on prison slave labor.
Right. We're getting rid of that.
Yeah.
Your yes vote is getting rid of that.
This is also a constitutional change, and that's part of the reason it's on your ballot. But as Brent said, there's only a few states that allow for incarcerated people to be used as forced labor.
Right.
That's some medieval bullshit. And
the
fact that California is like, I think even Alabama has more progressive laws about this than we do. I mean, like, nobody wants to be these people.
Yeah.
And, you know, especially in California, where we actually, this issue does come up periodically because some of the forced labor that, you know, incarcerated people are doing is firefighting in this state.
Yes, for sure. And they're making like $1 an hour.
Yeah, it's incredibly exploitive. And when they work, you know, they often are working for private corporations and making just cents on the hour because one thing about this law is the courts ruled that the minimum wage laws don't apply to incarcerated people.
Yeah, well, actually, it's part of the reason why this is on our ballot is because there was a proposition that was supposed to be on our ballot in 2022, but it ultimately got crushed at the legislative level. And for that very reason, and it was actually Newsom himself that was just sort of like, oh, well, it's going to cost the state too much money to pay incarcerated people minimum wage, which, by the way, the law didn't say
but also,
it was going to do that.
Sometimes you got to suffer for using.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I'm like, but also,
it's
like,
too expensive
that's
to be humane?
the other thing that's sort of like, you know, this is another ongoing theme that you'll hear and have heard and will continue to hear as we go through the rest of these props. But, like, even the ones that are, like, slam dunks, which this one obviously is. Like you're voting yes to get rid of involuntary servitude. So like do that.
Right.
But it's also like, could we also give prisoners worker protections?
Right.
Could we also pay them a wage that actually sort of could we allow them to save money? Right now I don't think that they're not making any, but I mean, like, you know, would that help with recidivism? Would, you know,
right.
I mean, it's like,
could we imprison fewer people in the first place?
Right, exactly. Like, I think that this is like certainly a yes, but also in the back of your mind, remember that we're still trying to abolish prisons.
That's right. Yeah, like we can't you can't fix a brutal system by amending it.
Right.
But people are in the brutal system right now. And
right, so,
those people need more protections than they have.
Right.
So this is a chance to take one step in the direction of rethinking how we want to treat, prisoners in California. And I think not forcing them to do slave labor is really it's totally. One step.
And it allows people to shorten their sentences also if they take work. So like work will still be available. Volunteer work is available for prisoners. But it does, like, it allows them to get credits and things. So it's like, you know, it's incrementalism. We're doing incrementalism. Surprise.
Right. Yeah. But it's like anytime that you can vote to abolish involuntary labor of any sort on the ballot, you just got to do it. And then use that as a springboard to think to yourself, what else could we do?
Right. Why is this bad? Well, and that was actually, on some level, this was good for me to think about that.
Yeah.
Because
agreed.
I don't even know that I knew that about California, that we were one of 16 states that still had it. But then I sort of like, I don't know that I had ever really given proper thought to, you know, how much people are making and what they're, you know, like, and how they're being exploited. And I should have, obviously, you know what I mean?
Well, it's also one of those
because
things,
capitalism.
Right, of course. It's one of those things that, you know, here it only becomes a statewide discussion during fire season. Right. And so, yes, and that's a very sort of like specific discussion where every fire season we're like, we shouldn't be using like incarcerated people to fight our fires. Maybe we should be paying firefighters since this is an incredibly dangerous job.
Right. Or paying those people to be
paying
firefighters.
those people to be firefighters, right?
Exactly.
They're trained firefighters. Maybe that's a thing. But also it's something that varies from state to state in a way that often makes you assume that whatever the thing was in your home state is similar here, and then you find out it's like way more brutal because I noticed, you know what is a comparison for that I often think about is the fact that I didn't realize that a lot of state legislatures are not paid or are paid in very part-time. You know, in New York State legislatures make six figures. State legislators make six figures for a part-time job. In some states, that role isn't paid at all as a volunteer role. In some states, it's paid as a stipend that's like $3,000 or something like that. You don't necessarily know which of those your state does if you move states because you kind of like wouldn't think about it until it comes up. So let this be the thing that helps, because now I wonder constantly when I'm in a new state what their state legislatures make. Now I think about it all the time because it's like a question that came to me. I feel like this is like a thing like that where you can be like, okay, how do they treat prisoners in this state? Do they have too many prisoners? California has one of the largest prison populations in the world. Like, why is that? Who's in prison? And how are we treating those people when they get there? Like, these are all questions you can now ask yourself because of this prop. So, you know, sit down and have a think.
That's right.
Then we skipped straight from Prop 6 to Prop 32.
Obviously.
The numbers always make a lot of sense on these props.
Yep.
This is also an easy yes because it raises the minimum wage. But it's another one where you might want to use it as a springboard. Yes.
Really, really think about this.
Think to yourself, what would be the right minimum wage to raise to?
Right. Because this is going to raise it to $18 an hour. Right. And as a person who makes more than that, potentially, you're probably thinking, oh, well, that sounds okay.
I mean, it's better than 16.
It's better than 15 or 16, right? Yeah, exactly. But it is not enough.
That's right.
So that is still very much a wage that does not allow you to live as a single person with a home and feed yourself in the state of California.
Yeah.
So you might be wondering why that would be the number that we arbitrarily picked for our minimum wage. And that is a fair question for you to be asking.
It's not one we have the answer to.
It's not one we have the answer to.
Do you want to know the number that would actually make it possible for you to live as just a single person with no children and afford the basics in the state of California?
Yeah.
On average. So not even in the cheapest part of California. Yeah, or the most expensive part of California. Sorry. That wage is $27.32 an hour.
Yeah, that's not $18.
That's not $18 an hour.
Yeah, interesting.
So I guess, I mean, then minimum wage workers can be mildly less poor. And listen, that's better than being more poor.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
You gotta
and I
vote
think
yes.
that, like, we voted yes, and I hope people don't tire of voting on this, because we voted yes to raise it to 15 and then move it to 16. So, like, we've continued to acknowledge that people aren't making enough here. Yeah. So my hope is that if on the ballot in 2026 we're voting to raise it to 20, then we would vote yes on it, and people understand that, like, you have to keep doing that.
Yes.
But, like, I do always sort of, like, hesitate to just, like, it's so bizarre that we're just picking numbers out of thin air. I mean, it's an acknowledgement, and I think I saw some sort of statistic that, like, I think, like, 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 Californians are making minimum wage. I think it's like 16 or 17% or something like that. So it's like, we're acknowledging, like, by setting the minimum wage at $18, you are tacitly saying, I am comfortable with a person working 40 hours a week and not being able to feed and house themselves.
That's right.
And it's like, A, you shouldn't be comfortable with that.
Right.
But B, like, this whole sort of, like, there's going to be people who will be like, oh, well, small business can't afford to pay their workers $18 an hour. Well, then get a different fucking business model.
Yeah.
Like,
if your work can't pay someone a living wage, then something needs to change about the way the work is done.
You're paying for all of these things on the back end, right? You're paying for homeless services. You're paying for, I mean, it's just like, if we could actually have something that, like, was even nearing a living wage, then, like, I just,
well,
this
there's
whole
also
sort of just making up dollar amounts is wild to me.
This also leads well to our next discussion, in that there are things you can do that cap or lower the cost of living as well that we're also not doing.
Well, for sure, yeah.
Because I feel you hear that number $27 and you're like, what? Jesus Christ. Like, of course no one can afford to jump $10 an hour in a minimum wage job for their employee or whatever. Like, I get that as someone, if you're someone who employs someone, you can understand why that would be a scary leap, know, to 30%, more, a higher wage or whatever. I mean, a 50% higher wage. That would be a big deal financially.
Sure.
But also, if that is your concern, then you need to figure out, the cost of living in California is higher than it is everywhere else.
Right.
It's not just because there's a lot of demand to live in California. It's because of policies that we pursued that make housing incredibly expensive here, that make transportation incredibly expensive here.
Yeah, if we could bring that $27 amount down,
that would also help.
That would help you.
And that leads us to a discussion of Prop 33.
Right.
Because Prop 33... another yes vote for you.
Yes. A hard yes.
Hard yes.
And this is the one that you have probably seen the most commercials for.
There's a lot of money going into this one.
Disregard them just immediately out of hand.
That's right. Prop 33 gets rid of Costa-Hawkins.
Right.
And that, listen, we vote on that every fucking year. Every single time we have a ballot filled with these propositions, you get one of these, and we never pass it because of the amount of money that goes into the no campaign.
Yeah.
The reason that much money is going into the no campaign is because it is very wealthy groups that are opposed to this.
Yeah.
That are opposed to laws that this law doesn't do anything for you on the front end. So whatever threats you're hearing from the advertising are things that they are kind of projecting onto this law.
Yeah.
The law itself gets rid of one provision at the state level that prevents your city from imposing rent control laws.
Yeah, and that's what I really think is, like, at least the point that I want to make in this podcast is that, like, you're right. All of the no commercials are like, X, Y, and Z is going to happen when, if yes passes, and this will, like, who knows? All of those things are hypotheticals, and what you need to remember is that all Prop 33 does is get rid of Costa-Hawkins. And that's what's most important.
Yeah.
Everything else you can sort of deal with on the back end. Are there going to be some people who sort of use the void of that law to nefarious ends, like terrible rich cities like, Huntington Beach or
so
wherever?
What we use for
it's the stand-in for, like, the worst place on earth. Of course they are.
Yeah.
Right? But, like, you have to get rid of this awful law that is allowing cities to, at least in Los Angeles anyway, to be able to raise rent arbitrarily to millions of dollars on any building that was built after 1978, for God's sake.
Yeah, so what Costa-Hawkins does is it prevents your city from applying their own rent control laws to any new construction or single-family homes.
Right, new construction.
And by new, we mean an arbitrary date that is chosen that is 1978 in LA.
Right. This law was passed in 1995, and it backdated to 1978 at the time. So any building built before 1978, and if you don't live in Los Angeles, you may not be aware that there is a new building on every single street corner everywhere.
And many of those new buildings are replacing an old building.
We're not lacking housing. We're lacking affordable housing.
That's right. Yeah, I think a lot of the threats with this law are always like, well, no one will build housing and then we won't have enough housing and we're already in a housing crisis. But I want to be clear that what this law means is that when a building that is the age of my current home gets torn down, the tenants who come and replace the people like me who have rent-controlled apartments that they can afford to stay in for the long term do not have the same renter protections that I do.
Oh, yeah.
And the city itself, even if it is in the city's interest to allow those tenants to have those protections, is barred by the state from imposing them.
Yeah.
So it means that tenants, every time that we tear down housing that is old and decrepit and build new housing, tenants lose protections and the cost of living goes up.
Yep.
That's what it means.
Oh, yeah. This is Costa-Hawkins is the main driver of high rents and inventory and our tenant crisis right now, housing crisis. It's Costa-Hawkins. So
if your city where you live and vote for local elected officials decides it would be in the city's interest to protect tenants for X, Y, and Z reasons because, you know, nefarious developers have come in, because giant corporations are buying up all the housing, whatever it is.
Yep.
If your city, your local city, the city of West Hollywood that we're in right now, decides that they want to protect tenants in a way that would benefit the community, they are barred by the state from doing that, even if it's in the interest of the community.
Yep.
That's what that law does.
Yep.
Whatever you're hearing about what it could do, that's what it does now.
Right.
So if you're wondering why rent is so damn expensive, the words of Jimmy McMillan, why the rent is too damn high, R.I.P., the reason is partly, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but this is one of the ways that we could address that problem. The reason is in part this law. Yeah. And we vote every year on the ballot. We vote on whether or not we should get rid of this law. And every year, no wins because of the amount of money that goes into the no campaign and because Californians are misled about what this law would mean or what this change would mean. And this year you have, I think, additional reasons to kind of be tuned into this conversation about the funding on this law.
Yes.
Because of Prop 34.
Right. It sort of has a sister proposition.
It has a sister prop.
With it.
That's right.
Which is sort of being now dubbed, I think, the revenge prop.
Well, it's literally a revenge prop.
Right. Because another thing that you may not know if you live in California is that AHF, AIDS Healthcare Foundation, is a huge organization, and they fund a lot of, they're funding Prop 33.
Right.
So, and they have done so in the past. So they are, and they fund a lot of different props for various different reasons.
And they're not the greatest coalition builder.
Some of them,
people have mixed feelings about them. We get it.
Right, exactly. I think there was one prop that was some sort of like weird zoning law, and everybody came to realize that it was literally just because they didn't want like a giant building built across the street from them that was going to like block their view of the Hollywood sign, essentially.
Right.
And that was like a statewide prop.
Yes.
And I'm not.
And that's what's going on in the prop system.
I'm not being over dramatic about that. That's literally what it was.
That's what's going on with the prop system in California.
Right. And that's what's sometimes going on with AHF.
Yes. True.
So, in response to Proposition 33, all of these well-funded groups, the realtors and others, have basically taken out, they're trying to end AHF's ability to spend money on political action.
That's right. So, though the California Association of Realtors is an organization that I would like to see stop being able to spend money on realtors. And this fake group they started, the California Apartment Association, which is a group of landlord and developer lobbyists that is funding Prop 34, is another group that I would like to see not being able to spend money on political speech. And yet here we are.
Right. And it's nefarious because what you're going to see on your ballot is going to be something that you may think to yourself sounds fine.
Yeah.
Because what it does is that it requires certain, I believe, like healthcare companies.
Well, what they call certain healthcare companies, but when it's defined in the law only applies to AHF.
Right, exactly. It's going to require AHF and AHF only to spend like 98% of specific revenue streams that they take in to be spent on direct patient care services. And like you're going to think, "Oh, well that sounds great."
Yeah.
But like AHF is using specific revenue streams to do this political action and to try and get rent control.
Right.
And so the apartment groups are like, well, we don't want rent control. So we're basically going, and since it's AHF that's funding it every single time that this comes up on the proposition, if we can just take out AHF's ability to fund these propositions, then we can end the discussion on rent control, essentially.
And this is, by the way, why we need some sort of prop campaign finance reform more broadly, because you shouldn't be able to do a revenge prop against one healthcare provider because you yourself want the ability to spend unfettered money or have the unfettered ability to spend money on political speech yourself, and you want to shut down your opponents.
It's really crazy.
It's wild that an organization that is also just an interest group is able to spend money to take down a healthcare provider's ability. And the reason that AHF is supporting rent control is because that is what is good for its patients and the community that it works for. Right. Like, they're not doing it because AHF personally needs rent control in the way that they needed access to the Hollywood sign.
They do, I think, sort of like have some...
Well, no, I'm sure they have some...
They have housing and stuff.
Interest in it.
There's interest, obviously.
Obviously, that's...
Right, of course.
But I mean, like, the kind of... The public interest in this law is not... It's not the same as the Hollywood view one that they, had before. Like, this is something that would be broadly in the public interest.
Yeah.
Whereas Prop 34 has no benefit in the public interest.
No benefit. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
how does that, like, how can that be a prop that we're voting on statewide? Just because realtors don't like AHF?
It's so fucking nuts. And it is a perfect example of what you should not be allowed to do with the prop system.
Yeah. All right, moving on to our next entry in why can't our stupid legislature just deal with this?
Oh my God.
Prop 35.
Prop 35 is probably the most confusing prop on the ballot, but it's also the most needlessly confusing prop on the ballot. This is every year I feel like we have a prop where we're like, vote no to tell them no to this kind of prop.
Yes.
And this is our year for that.
Yeah.
You may be someone who really cares deeply about MCO taxes and how we're funding Medicare and Medi-Cal and the intricacies of that. And listen, I am somebody who cares about that.
I was going to say.
I read the law. I understand what this prop does.
That makes one of us.
I vote no on having had to have read that in the first place.
Yeah, this one is confusing enough that it has actually, I think, confused a lot of, there's a lot of, other prop guides and organizations that are both state organizations and then also local organizations. And we looked at some prop guides based on some of the local healthcare organizations that relies on some of this Medi-Cal and Medicaid funding. Everybody is all over the map on whether you're supposed to vote yes or no on this. And I think it's...
Anyone who took it seriously, the joke is on them. Here is the deal with this prop. The legislature is going to solve this problem. And if they don't, that's going to be the legislature's problem and that is not for us to solve. This is a perfect example of a prop that is not our business.
Right.
And if you don't have a staff and a lawyer and the ability to negotiate the language within the prop, because of course it's not perfect and there's issues with it, and a history in healthcare advocacy, or just a history in obscure funding mechanisms for public healthcare
political
programs,
science or public health degree,
then you should not be consulted on this matter.
Right.
This has nothing to do with you. This is the epitome of why we have legislators.
Right. It basically makes permanent some method of funding for Medi-Cal and Medicaid, but it still has to be approved by the state legislature because I think that funding also has to be approved by the federal government or something.
Right.
Isn't
There's
that right?
a kind of tax that's expiring, and the legislature's going to fix it. And if they don't, bother them. If you find that your Medi-Cal or Medicaid funding has not come through because of something having to do with Prop 35, call your reps.
Yeah. There's no world where, whether this is a yes or no, there's no world where the legislature doesn't have to figure out what to do and how to fund
there is
this.
No world in which you understand what this would do. Right. Or why, or what the impacts would be, or what, because this is the kind of thing, and this is why I feel like something like this doesn't belong on our ballot in the first place, is if you're a legislator and you get something like this, which, has to do with extending a tax extending an MCO tax.
Right.
You have the ability to negotiate the details before you get your yes vote. before you make your yes vote. So like you have the ability to be in the legislature being like, I will vote yes on this if X, Y, and Z is addressed. My lawyer told me that it would have this impact. My staff told me it would have this impact. I will vote yes if X, Y, and Z happens. I will vote no if that doesn't happen, or I will negotiate on those bases. If you are a random California resident, you don't have the ability to engage in tax law in that way. So you don't have any business being consulted about it. Right. This is not your business.
It's not your business.
Vote no to just be like, fuck off.
Yeah.
And we said that with some of the dialysis props. There are certain props that deserve a no vote just to be like, don't fucking ask me this again.
Right.
Stay away.
Cut it out.
Yeah, cut it out. This is the cut it out prop of and you might see some guides that took it seriously and really delved into it and they want you to vote yes. And I would say to them, don't engage in this silliness.
I know. I've seen yes and no's, but I've also seen no recommendations. I mean, there's
no way to make
a
good recommendation
right,
here.
I was going to say, I think DSA wrote like a novel's worth of entry trying to explain the thing, and then they were like, live your life.
Yeah. No, exactly. This is, live your life. Live your life. But I would say if you're ever faced with a live your life prop, always vote no on that prop.
Yeah, I agree.
Just to be like,
we're not doing this.
We're not engaging.
Yeah.
I refuse this.
Yeah.
Prop 36 is dumb, and you should vote no with your whole chest.
Oh my God.
It's like we want to bring back like 3 strikes laws. Like, what are we doing, you guys?
I know. I voted to get rid of 3 strikes laws.
We just went through this. We were really proud of ourselves when we got rid of them.
We were so proud of ourselves.
And now what are we doing? We're just back here because a bunch of police officers want the ability to just... We just talked about how brutal the prisons are here.
Right.
We don't...
Now we want to like make new crimes?
Like, stop trying to make it criming to do boring stuff no one cares about.
Oh, God.
You want people to go away.
This is all, by the way, just in response to like the scaremongering going on over like a retail theft.
Yes.
That's all this is.
No, this is just retaliation. It's retaliation about the BLM protests. It's retaliation because there's a big scare. Because the LAPD hasn't been getting the best press. The other local police departments in the state of California have also not been getting the best press. Police officers in general are not, I would say, having their greatest period.
Sure.
As reputationally, and they're mad about it. And so they instead want to be more brutal. They want to show you that we're going to get down there and solve crime.
Yeah, they want more reasons to throw people in prison.
Like, this law would literally turn back the clock on a thing that we already decided was a bad idea, which is putting people away for years over minor drug crimes.
Right.
Like, we realized that, that was expensive. And there was no reason that taxpayers should be paying to do that. It's expensive to imprison people. We pay a lot of money to imprison people and make them do slave labor.
Right. And also, like, it creates mandatory sentence enhancements for petty theft.
Like, get out of here.
Just because Target is mad that somebody stole deodorant from them, I can't.
The reason people are stealing deodorant is everything is too fucking expensive right now. Deal with that.
Yeah.
Like, people don't have enough money to live. That would reduce crime. Reducing crime is not just putting people in jail for stealing deodorant.
I know. Reducing
crime is making it so that people don't need to steal deodorant.
Where's the proposition where I can vote in favor of allowing people to do that?
I know. Steal from big box stores. The stealing from...
I want a Prop 37 that encourages petty theft.
Right. Steal as much deodorant as you need from CVS.
And I know it's more than... I mean, I know, like...
No.
There's going to be people who are listening to this. It's like...
Right, that are like...
I get it. Smash and grabs.
If you feel
still fuck off.
Crime is out of control and you can't understand why you don't feel safe, the reasons are not because we're not locking enough people up. It never has been, and that's never worked to solve it.
No.
What solves it is people making a living wage, having a home to live in, and being able to afford the basics.
Yep.
What solves it is people being able to afford or at least access education.
Yeah.
What solves it is people being able to have jobs.
Yeah, I was going to say...
What solves it is when people don't have to live in tents.
Yeah, if you're concerned about crime, then vote yes on 2. Vote yes on 33. Vote yes.
Right. There's plenty yes you can do here.
Vote yes on the minimum wage one, which number I'm forgetting right now. But there's other props actively on this specific ballot that are gonna better deal with crime than throwing people in prison.
No, I mean all of these things are connected to people having no other options and choices.
Yeah.
If you can afford a nice home and you can bring a nice chicken home for dinner or whatever, and you have as much deodorant as you could ever
nice
need,
chicken.
and your kids are in college and whatever.
You don't need to smash and grab.
You don't need to smash and grab. Like, then I feel like people forget that, like, the law enforcement system was theoretically, and I know it's imperfect and that we shouldn't be using it the way we use it anyway, but I mean, like, the idea of imprisoning people is to get people who are a danger to the community off the streets and away from people. That's not just regular people who are desperate. The reason that we have a society is so that those people can be taken care of by community.
Right.
The reason that we have prisons, flawed as a system as that is, and also as problematic as we use it, like, is to get people who would be, like, a danger to the community off the streets, not to force people to become a danger to the community because they have no choices, and then imprison them, and then we have to pay for them for the rest of our lives to be in prison. Like, this is not, it's not economical. It doesn't make any sense socially. There are other ways to deal with...
Well, it's inhumane.
It's inhumane. I mean, that's the sort of the larger conversation that we've been having here is just, like, it's inhumane. But, like, even in a world where you're like, it's okay for us to be inhumane, this doesn't solve the problem that you need solved.
Right.
Like, even if I buy your framework where, like, prisons are important because they theoretically protect, whatever, even in that world, this doesn't solve the problem.
Right.
Putting people for minor drug crimes behind bars for years just derails their entire life.
Right.
Makes recidivism way more likely.
I was going to say, they're going to be back in prison.
They're going to be back in prison because what
right.
else are they going to do?
Right.
They're going to get out of prison. They're not going to have a job. They're not going to have an ID. They're not going to have anything.
Yep.
And then we're going to wonder why they end up back in prison. Like, this is so short-sighted and dumb. And I can't believe that this is on our ballot in the year 2024.
Wild.
Like, get out of town. Anyway, those are the props.
Those are the state props.
Yeah.
Too many.
Too many.
Some are ridiculous.
That's right. Many are ridiculous.
Most of them. We both realize that at the same time.
Most are ridiculous.
It's like, yeah, some of them are ridiculous. Some of them aren't. Most of them are. You're right.
Yeah,
You're
no.
right, yeah.
It's very few of them are non-ridiculous.
Taken on the whole, most
we
of them
were
are
clear about which ones were non-ridiculous.
Right.
There's maybe 3 of them. The rest are ridiculous.
Yeah.
I think you are likely to have a lot of down ballot props as well. What we're going to do is we're going to post our ballot guide on Google Docs or something on the internet, and we're going to post our vote recommendations for those as well, and we'll fill in the reasons as we have time.
Yeah, because there's some other biggies.
Yeah, there's some LA County measures that are important.
Yeah, and even some of the city ones, the charter reform ones are
exactly
very important too. So, like, you should be aware of those, and I know it's in, like, a lot of people sort of will check out on as sort of as they get smaller, people sort of care less, which is the opposite of what you should be doing. But
that's life.
We haven't ignored those in this recording because we don't care about them. It's just because
of time.
It's because of time, and we're gonna deal with them on the website.
Yeah.
So
those recommendations will be up on the ballot guide, but we're not going to cover them in this episode.
Right.
And then next week we're going to go back to election news.
Yes.
So you'll be hearing,
because that's obviously
it's happening
coming
very soon.
Quickly. Yeah.
But if you are a person who has not yet gotten your ballot,
look into that, because you should
look into it because your ballot probably came.
Right.
But as you know, if you live in LA County, you can vote in, or is it city? No, it's county, right? It's LA County that has the vote.
Yeah.
You can vote at any of the vote centers in LA County. You don't have to be in your district or your precinct or whatever. So if you have not received your ballot, you can still vote.
Yeah.
Don't panic fully.
Yeah.
But you may have to vote in person, and you may have to account for what happened to your ballot.
And if you have received it, if listening to this podcast about these, however many props hasn't scared you into opening it, I know it's funny that we talk about, make a plan for voting often, and obviously you should do that and, get your act together. But, like, I feel like as a person in Los Angeles who probably did get your ballot mailed to you, I think your first plan in voting should be to open it now.
Yes.
Because it really is alarming.
Yes.
And so it's like one of those things where, like, I opened it almost immediately, and it's because I knew it was going to be alarming. But if you're not prepared for the amount of alarming that it is, and you open it the day before you have to get it in the mail, you may not get it in the mail.
That's right.
Like, it takes care in filling out. So, like,
right.
open it.
If you are somebody who is looking for a full ballot guide, that is an email that I send out individually to everyone.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to be added to that list, then write to us at braintrust@gmail.com. I'll add you to the list. We don't send that out to the public, but that does get sent out to all of our friends and family. So
yeah. And I might well, I don't know what I'll do. But if you want to know what I'm doing,
yeah,
you can tweet me because I might be going rogue.
Yeah,
in a few places.
Brent and I will both send you our recommendations for the rest of the ballot. That is something we are always willing to do.
Yeah.
And also, this will be posted. You'll be able to find our prop ballot guide, and feel free to share it with whoever.
Yeah.
We just want people to vote right on these props.
Just vote. Right.
And if you have questions about the California ballot, or frankly your ballot anywhere,
Oh yeah, we love to
research a ballot situation elsewhere too.
Oh yeah, and we've done that for people before in
Yeah.
various parts of the country who have been like, "What am I supposed to vote on this?" And we're like, "Well,
Yeah.
let us tell you."
Yeah,
And then we will.
There's a really important prop on the New York ballot as well that would codify Roe essentially into the state constitution. So you should vote yes on the ERA.
Yeah.
I know the ERA is is a bad name for it because that's a law that never passes and a constitutional amendment that has never happened, and it's just like the world's acronym of failure. But vote yes on the ERA prop. I think it's Prop 1. Because what that would do, no matter what you're hearing scare tactic wise about it allowing, anyone to be any gender or whatever nonsense they're talking about in Republican circles about that.
Sure.
What it is meant to do is codify Roe.
Okay.
And you should codify Roe
Yeah.
in the state constitution in New York. So you should vote yes on that.
And also let people be whatever gender they want to be.
Yeah, I mean, right. Mind your business about people's gender. I'm just saying, like, if you're someone who's like sitting around and you're like, that's the prop that allows schools to do gender change operations or sex change operations on children or whatever Donald Trump is telling you.
A human kitty litter.
Right, exactly.
Bathroom, whatever Republican.
Yeah, like if that's what you're hearing about it, just know that prop is to codify Roe.
Right.
That's an abortion prop.
Oh, God.
And you should vote yes on it. So, that's the news. And we'll talk to you next week.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.